We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, ViewRail.
America's leading manufacturer of floating stairs and modern cable glass railings.
They handle every part of the process, from design, engineering, manufacturing, delivery, all the way to installation.
There is a 10-year structural and finish warranty on all products installed by ViewRail certified technician.
Nearly all components are made in-house, giving you more control over style, material, finishes, budget, and timeline.
All products are designed as a modular, integrated system that are engineered for easy installation. It's like putting together an erector set.
Thanks so much again, ViewRail, for sponsoring this episode.
We want to say thank you to our sponsor, Benjamin Obdike, for sponsoring this episode of Passion for Craft.
It's time to think differently about our roof construction. Vapor Dry SA is not your grandpappy's underlayment. It provides a fully sealed roof deck that is permeable, allowing trapped moisture to escape while it seals every fastener.
Used in conjunction with Cedar Breather Roof Mat, allowing a fully ventilated space for cedar, metal, and cold roof applications.
It can replace traditional adhered products in valleys and eaves to protect from ice damming.
It's extremely durable and walkable, approved for all high temperature environments.
Thanks so much again to Benjamin Obdike for sponsoring this episode.
Check out the description for a build show sample kit.
Welcome back to the Passion for Craft podcast. We're back again. We're jumping right back in. I had some questions that I forgot to ask Brent about Paris and France and a lot of other things. And then going to do a quick update on school. Because I'm in Boston right now, we have some show and tell that I can do that I don't normally get to bring down. First and foremost, Dad, what is it that you were kind of hoping out of this trip? Like, what were the places that you were the most excited about to see, like, going into it?
Well, I mean, there's a French architecture book. There's an architect here in Texas called Dilbeck, Charles Dilbeck. He did not travel. One of the few architects I know who didn't go on a grand tour or didn't travel. And he had one book, and it was a book with pictures only of Normandy, France. And these were farmhouses and things like that. And it inspired a bunch of his architecture. So I was hoping to go to Normandy to look at the rural architecture of that region. And, you know, I've been to England and London more than I've been to France. I've been to France twice or 3 times. Anyway, it's just, I think French architecture is stunning and amazing. And I wanted to study it a little bit more and see it. And so that was what I was hoping to do. And so, you know, we'll try again. Yeah, no, that's what I was doing. I wanted to see that rural architecture, and I wanted to, you know, see the chateaus, 17th, 18th century stuff, that compare it to the things we're building, get inspiration. It was the deal.
Were there any of those chateaus that you were particularly excited about, or was that all just kind of thrown at you? You're like, whatever, I'll just check it out.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really traveled. I went down to the south of France and stayed at this lady's place one time, and I had never been to Normandy, and so I wanted to go. I mean, it was really just so what's Normandy look like? And so it was not I've got to go see this place or anything like that.
By the way, just comparing and contrasting, that chateau in the south of France that we went to was cool. Like, I want to hear your thoughts, because I was like 12, so I don't like fully remember. But the vibe of that place was, it was a rundown chateau that had been bought, modernized, and like turned into a little bit more of like a livable area, but the decorations inside were very modern, were very like updated, and kind of like, I don't know, hip. What would you say the vibe of that place was? Pretty much that?
So that was 17th century, is the 1600s. And so, I mean, it was nice for the south of France. Like, there's wealthier areas of different countries. Like the Loire Valley in France is the richest area because of the Seine River that flows out to the sea there. And so you have exports and imports going into Paris. And so you had wealthy merchants setting up, you know, trading on, you know, in the Loire Valley, and you had a lot of wealth there. Whereas in the south of France, you had different kinds, and there's more rural, less trading, so that wasn't as wealthy a building. And so that would be the difference.
As I remember with that building, like, it almost didn't have like a classic roof on it. It had like a more flat roof on it. Is that right?
No, I mean it would have been a flatter roof because you were in a southern climate. They didn't have
Okay.
snow loads, and so it was less of a pitch than you would have seen up in
Yeah.
northern France.
I just also remember like all the floors were stone. The second floor was like poured concrete stone, and then the first floor was. You remember that?
Second floor was lootered, big slabs of stone.
Oh, it was just slabs.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah.
But like that was a different feeling than a lot of these chateaus that we were at up north, because the ones up north felt like we were in like a Georgian mansion almost. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
the interiors, there was very little stone used on the interiors. It was all like the wooden floors, and a lot of them were like had the Versailles patterns like decorated into them.
Yeah.
So like all the floor patterns were inspired by Versailles, or whatever hip new trend keeping up with the Joneses caused people to want to be and want to have, right?
Yeah, some of my favorite books are the edition Vial, Vial. They are hard to get, but they have a number of historic, one on stairs, one on floors, one on doors, and it's all French stuff. And, I mean, that I guess the other thing I love about France is that, when they were building in that period, it was just they did things that other people didn't do. And just like you were saying in the last episode, just looking at it going, oh my gosh, I can't believe what they can do. They pushed the boundaries better than any other country I know of as far as just how things looked. And so it's amazing. It's amazing.
One thing that I kept remembering is you said there will never be another Versailles. Like there will never be another Versailles. And you like repeat it and it's annoying and you're like, no one can do it. And I get it now. Like I get why you say that. But also there's like that part inside of me that's like, if we try hard enough, we can.
Well, I mean, certainly from the American, if you think about it this way, okay, there's an era in Europe called the Golden Age, okay, and Mark Twain, humorously said about America in our golden period of the late 1800s with the robber barons and all that it was the Gilded Age, okay? So basically the difference between gold and gilding is basically a gold leaf that's put on top of, regular wood. It's showing he was making fun of the fact that we as Americans were trying to, show off what we could do, but we were really just gilding versus what they were doing as far as golden. And so, I mean, when you consider that Versailles has a gold roof,
Yeah.
gold cresting on the roof, it's stupid. I mean, what in the world? Are you kidding me? And so, and then to think that an American goes over there and sees that, and he might have a lot of money and go, yeah, I'm going to try. I'm going to build a Versailles. That was really where
Right.
my comment was coming from. It was just like it was throwing a rock to Hawaii from California. You just some people might get closer than others, but no one's going to do it. And
Yeah.
so it just was a different time, different levels of wealth.
When was Versailles bought? Or like, sorry, bought. When was Versailles built?
So that was Louis the 14th. So it had been early
It
1700s,
was.
and he set up Versailles as the center of power because there was a lot of backstabbing that was taking place in Paris, and it was a way for him to accumulate or put power, have a power station, power place where he could control government and everything else. And so he basically moved the government out to Versailles, and it allowed him to rule and build and do what he was doing. So, it was Louis the 14th.
So when was that again?
I think it's early 1700s. It might be late 1600s, early 1700s.
We were playing this game. It was really fun. Basically, it was like give a question that has a numerical answer that nobody knows. Like just how far is it in miles to the sun, or like, random stuff like that. And I'm sure there's someone out there like, oh, I know. But one of the questions was how, in today's currency, how rich was the Sun King at the peak of his wealth? Like, what was his net worth?
That's a good question.
What would you say? My guess was 100 $100 billion. That was my guess.
Oh, I think it was more than that. I think he could have been a trillionaire comparatively.
they like did the side by side comparison. They said like based off of like every how an economics fluctuate and everything, he's probably the second wealthiest emperor to ever have existed.
Wow.
He was like estimated 200 to 300 billion. That was his
I thought
estimation.
I would have thought it would have been more than that, but that's
Well, Elon Musk was just like nominated, or they basically calculated Elon Musk's net worth at like 400 billion, and based on inflation and everything like that, they were like he's surpassed everyone's current whatever. I think it was a Forbes article that was talking about that. But basically, the idea like that's how rich Louis the 14th was, and it wasn't in stock. It was like cash money, like assets. Like maybe it was a painting here or there too, but like he had so much wealth. It was crazy.
wow.
Which was really helpful in like understanding, oh, that's why, this is that. And that was another reason like I wanted you on the trip, because like I wouldn't have wanted you there like personally, but like because you're like an encyclopedia of knowledge, and so I could be like, hey, why is this? No, but it was hard. Like I would walk into a room and I'd kind of be like internally like, oh yeah, that'd be impressive if it wasn't plaster. And they're like, that's wood on the ceiling there. I'm like, oh, okay, so it is impressive. You know what I mean? Like, I guess I just had the wrong assumption. It was like I knew what to assume and I knew what to like guess. I knew what was good and what was bad, but my instincts were all wrong. And so I just needed a little helpful guiding hand of someone who was like, no, I know. Like I know what that is. I know why that's cool. I know what.
Let's put this in perspective, okay? I think you've got a dovetailed corner of your door of a drawer with you, and learning how to do that, okay? And how many craftsmen out there can cut and make a dovetail drawer? And we're talking about a level of skill that they're doing that makes dovetail drawers look like it looks like nailing a stud to a plate. I mean, it's just it's stupid how skilled and skilled they were. And so, you doing what you're doing there with that dovetail, and in today's terms, that dovetail is actually, not very many people know how to cut a dovetail drawer. And so, you have sharp chisels, you know how to use saws, you know how to do a bunch of different stuff and lay things out and make things. And that would probably have been, year one of an apprentice, in France in that period, if not earlier. And so it's just, they then, that's why I look at and I see opportunities, just like we have so much opportunity as far as where we can go and what we can do. Yeah, it's just crazy.
So one thing, North Bennett Street, they bring in a guy from the Stereotomy Guild in France every 2 years, I believe, to teach the instructors. Like it's a continued ed course, but this guy's booked out like crazy. But I think he's originally an American or he's Canadian.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
That's what I think.
And he went over to France specifically for this compagnon, which basically is like their guild. It's like brotherhood is what it means, or companion. Basically, I
think it's company, right?
It might be. I honestly just don't know. But when I was over there, I was walking around with one of our tour guides who was an architecture student, and he was like, oh yeah, you might like this building. And he like walks me over to this random building, and it was another guild, essentially. And he was like, it's a school. And I was like, I saw compagnon on the side of the building. I was like, oh, that's a 7-year course. He's like, oh yeah, you know of it. But it was like it wasn't the Stereotomy one. It was a different one. It was like a roofers guild. And so, I don't know. I asked him about it, and I was like, you're an architecture student. Like, what do you know about it? He's like, I don't really know much about it. I don't know what that is. I mean, the word means like brother. So I don't think it's... And I asked our other tour guys, I asked other people, they were like, you're saying friend? Like, you mean a friendship? And I was like, no, it's like a guild. And he was like, oh, yeah, I could mean that. So even over there, it's kind of unknown. It's still like it's a niche thing over there too. Like I just think it's and maybe I was asking the wrong people, maybe I didn't have the right crowd, but it seems like this lost art really is like this lost art that people are, striving for and want, but also you're kind of losing, like, where do you get it? You got to be in these niches. If you listen to this podcast, you're already like a leg above anyone else who, wants to do this stuff. I don't know. I was shocked that they didn't know that an architecture student of all people wouldn't know like a roofers guild, especially their 7 years, like, I don't know.
So,
Also 7 years versus a 4 year institution or the 2 year school that I'm going to.
so you're,
That,
it's now the end of March. You've got a month and a half left of school, right? For
right?
your first year. What do you feel like you've learned to this point?
Okay. I want to get back to France eventually. Let's just put that out there because I got
Dude,
more questions for you.
how many more questions do you have?
I just want to know more about your thoughts on it. I don't feel like we've exhausted the topic. I feel like unless you're bored about it, I'm not trying to rub it into your face. I'm just trying to like legitimately. I think there's more interesting stuff on it.
All right, let's keep going.
But wait, I'll answer that question because I think it's just proves your point. Like I feel like I've learned. I feel like I've been drinking through a fire hose this whole year, and then when I reflect on like what we've accomplished in 7 months, it's like wow, we've learned a lot. But knowing what I know is out there in the world of building, I know I've only scratched the surface of the surface. You know what I mean?
I guess
Like,
I guess when I came back from North Bennett Street, one of the things that stood out to me is you're learning how things were crafted 250 years ago, and then you're going to move into a world where that isn't the reality, and
yeah,
no one understands that those. Well, no one who's not in preservation or understands. The regular carpenter doesn't understand what this heritage is and what this tradition is. And so, one, I want to get, I think it's useful to compare it to, what they have in France, because I think it puts in perspective how important learning the past is. And then, what the opportunity is and why I have made it my mantra to talk about that change. I think there's people out there that may want to go to North Bennett Street, and I don't know where else you learn what you're learning except at a school like that. And so that's why I'm going there. We can stay on France if you want.
yeah, no, I agree. I think North Bennett is like the answer in America. I don't know of another school. I don't know how much North Bennett, wants to readily advertise other schools that are like doing the same stuff that they're doing. But I feel like because it's so small, if they exist, it's like, oh, a friend in the sea, like in a tide of people that are going one direction. We're the only salmon swimming upstream trying to fight against a lot of that stuff.
Well,
Like
let me just
specifically preservation.
let me do a quick public service announcement. North Bennett Street, I'm on the board, and I'm leading the search committee for our next president. We have kind of decided that the person we're looking for is an entrepreneurial, visionary leader. And if you know someone who is interested in that job, then we want to get you in touch with them, and you can email me and I can get you in touch with them. We're trying to find someone who can help North Bennett Street be the voice of craft and change going forward. I mean, North Bennett Street is open to, having different locations. North Bennett Street is open to kind of bigger opportunities than just being in the north end of Boston. And so we're looking for someone who wants to help us build that and grow, craft and spread this tradition and spread this information. And so we're looking for someone who's like a visionary, who's probably pretty charismatic, so he can, pitch and sell and raise money and do all the things you need to do to, build a school. We're looking for that person. So if you know someone like that, or someone to be interested in talking about that, let us know, because we're actively looking. I think the search started officially last week. We're hoping to hire someone early summer so that they can start in the fall for that next school year. So FYI.
Yeah. Good PSA.
Yeah.
I guess one thing that I'm thinking of with terms to like preservation, to jump back to your least favorite topic of the day, France. Um, so many of these chateaus were handled differently, and like the cities were handled differently in philosophy, I guess. We went to a lot of different towns. We went to Paris, Fontainebleau, Cannes, not the one in the south, but the one in the north, Caen, and then Bayeux, and they all had different feels to them. Like Cannes was hit pretty heavily by the destruction of World War II, but there was like rebuilding efforts that happened there that were done with like all modern rebuilding stuff. Bayeux was not hit at all, so you have this like beautiful slice of historic Normandy that like you're walking cobbled streets. There's no new buildings except for like over on the far end of town. So that was like a really cool special thing in and of itself. And then you've got Paris, which is Paris. Like you start at Charles de Gaulle Airport, and then as you drive through the city, it's like modern, modern, old, old, really old, heart of the city, you know. And then there's like a blend and stuff, you know, different philosophies. And then Fontainebleau, older city. I don't know how much it was affected by Normandy. I think it's further west or east, whatever. But it had like old parts, but new parts really gracefully added back in. Whereas like they clearly took apart some of the old and added the old pieces to the new. What is your like design philosophy on that? Like, how do you blend old and new together? Because that was one of the things that I just kept thinking. I was like, how do you do this well? And I know you're not a city planner, but I thought some places did it better than others. And I was curious how you think you approach that.
It being city planning or it being preservation?
Just how to blend old and new stuff. Like the streets of Boston have a super historic home, and then right next to it, a brand new modern skyscraper type of building.
Yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean?
this is brought up a little bit in that book, Geography of Nowhere, where, you know, if you tear down all your historic buildings, everything looks like a strip mall. And so the fear of the geography of nowhere is that they're, all our buildings are going to look the same if we keep tearing all the old stuff down. The other thing is that where did we come from? You know, who am I and where do we come from if we don't know our past? And so if we don't know our history, we don't know our story, you know, who are we? And so you're asking yourself a lot of that. I mean, I think Dallas and Fort Worth are a good contrast. And Dallas is trying to be a cutting edge, important city, national reputation. Fort Worth doesn't really care about that as much and is much more into its history and proud of its history. You have things like, you know, the museums in Fort Worth are, you know, light years above the museums in Dallas because there's just a different culture. Minneapolis, St. Paul, apparently very different cities. And so some of those things are driven by the, you know, personalities and leaders of you know, early parts of the city that, you know, it kind of, a personality, you know, changes over time. You know, if you think about Suburban Nation and, you know, that book, which is, if you're interested in housing, you need to read that book. That, you know, they describe, you know, that the ideal in the new urban landscape is going back to the past and looking at how cities were developed in the early 1900s, where, you know, neighborhoods had wealthy houses, middle houses, less nice houses, all within the neighborhood, so that everyone went to the same school, they shopped at the same store, they went to the same church. And so, you know, the streets are slow and quiet. Whereas today, you've got gated communities where the houses are, you've got an industrial complex where the business is, you've got a shopping center where shopping is, you got downtown. And so you have to drive your car to all of those different places. So when you're describing what you saw in those different cities and how they're planned, you know, I think it really takes someone with vision, because I suspect that Bayou is a much more popular destination for tourists than Cannes is. And I would suspect only because there's more history there.
Isn't that crazy? It wasn't. It was less popular. It was the more sleepy town. But I, well, there were some like tourism, like there were a couple of tour buses that kind of came through Bayou, but I guess just because it's like a smaller town, I don't know. They were similarly small sized. So I was blown away because it felt like everyone should want to be here. And we didn't come during peak season, so maybe that was part of it. But then we went to Cayenne, and it was like everyone was there. It was a bigger city, maybe by a little bit, but it was more popping. There were more tour buses that we saw. And I was just like, really? Here? Like, why would you? Because, like, you're in Bayou and you like are walking down any one of the streets and you see this giant Notre Dame sized cathedral that's got a copper dome on it that's crowning the city. And you're like, whoa, I'm in this charming city. You hear the bells every hour. I don't know. I agree with you. It should be the more popular one. I don't know if it is in peak season, but when we were there, it was not, which was like, dang, miss.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what's going on with those different places, but if you're, yeah, I mean, so that's my philosophy. I just think that history and telling a story and having a narrative works for houses, it works for cities, it works for regions, it works for a person. Who am I? What's my story? And so being able to define that's real important.
That's where I was trying to go with this too, because my next question was, what is your take on some of these chateaus being like rebuilt? Like, there were a lot of different examples of this where, like, even in my favorite house, like the Forbes one, like they did modernize a couple of the rooms, mind you, to the 1950s, but still they like did work to make them more up with the times. And then they did refix like the older parts of the home to their true what they were, but they still, I don't know, like what do you look at with the modernization? I guess to contrast that, that one stayed pretty true to form, but then we went to one of these houses where the guy plastered over like all of these wainscot walls and like completely covered his walls in plaster so that he could paint faux stones on his walkway and like a scenery. It was just clear he was a painter and wanted a canvas with which to paint on. Anyway, we were in all of these different rooms and he had just painted on this historic walls. Like, what are we doing? This is crazy.
Yeah, I don't, I just think those are short-term solutions that, or short-term fixes that will be stripped off later. I mean, I would think, but I don't know. I didn't see it. Yeah.
I guess the middle example is like there was the Castle de Fontaine Henri. That's what it was. Castle Fontaine Henri. It was this beautiful castle. It had like a chapel next door to it that was built in like the 1100s. And then the next door, there was this castle. The castle's base was built in, 11 or 12. And then in the 13th century, they built on this one addition. And then they tore down half of that addition. And then the 16th century, they built on another addition. And then, so you have like a less adorned, like one face. And then as you progressively move left, looking at this house, there's more and more ornate carvings that are on the wood or on the stone. And then as you get further and further and they get more ornate and more fine, they get more like they've been wind blown. And over the years, they've been like completely whipped off and blown off. So you kind of had this like, oh, it's kind of like perfect Goldilocks in the middle. But as they got really finely carved on the farthest left side of the house, it had been rounded over as the wind had blown it over. Like, how do you look at something like that and parse that apart? Like, with what because all of it, I would say, was done very faithfully, like to the period. Like, do you look at that and go, wow, what a tapestry of the story? Or as it gets closer and closer to the 20th century, are you like, I just wish it was all from the 1200s? Because that was a big question that I had going at it. I was like, I love all these different parts of it, but the way it was blended together, it wasn't like there was like a logical story of like, and then they made this edition, and then they made this edition. It was like they took down half of the castle to put on this side. You know what I mean?
Well, they've just got a much more complex preservation path than we do. I mean, when you have centuries of change and centuries of, because
nearly a millennia.
Yeah, literally. I mean, you're where do you stop? Where do you start? what are you restoring to? Because,
Yeah.
in here, one of the philosophies of preservation is that, you got an historic house. Which period are we restoring it to? Thistle
Right.
Hill, right? Thistle Hill is 1904 and it was redone in 1911. Are you going to restore it? You're going to take off 1911 to get back to 1904?
Right.
No. And so, then you get into almost philosophical discussions. Let's say it's 500 years old and it's had a very important part of the history, was some famous ruler, and then it went through 300 years of decline, and then there was another important person, and then so it goes like this.
Yeah.
What do you do? And usually architects, owners, preservationists are sitting around having that discussion, and they could be quite crass about it and say, look, it's going to be more popular. We're going to make more money if we celebrate this person and restore it to this era than if we do that. And so you end up getting into a philosophical conversation about when you're going to restore it to. But it's much more complex than what we've got.
So I guess like let's get into that philosophical conversation a little bit. Like, what are the pros and what are the cons of why you would jump into a different, like why you would jump into the 1911 versus the 1904 and want one over the other? Like, what would be a reason that you would be drawn more towards one or the other?
Well, I mean,
Is it significance? Is it
so
historical
yeah.
significance?
One thing would be we want to take it back to its original. Well, its
Okay.
original is 1904, and they tore off a lot of that and redid it. Spent more money in 1911. Now, what are the consequences going back to 1904? One, you're going to be getting rid of a lot of great historic material, those stone columns on the front being one. Two, you're going to go back to a Victorian era that begins to tell a different story about the house and who lived there and what's going on. At the same time, you've got to manage the dollars that you have. I mean, these preservation places, I mean, you saw it with some of these chateaus, they don't have money. And so, the country houses in England and the whole story of Downton Abbey is basically a rich Harris came in and married an Englishman so that he could keep that house going. And there's a book that I've got that recounts the American wealth that saved the English aristocratic class or saved the country houses in England, because they basically, the Pillsbury heir comes over, falls in love with this English aristocrat. She gets to marry an aristocrat. He gets to fix up and continue to live a lifestyle that he had been used to.
Right.
In any case, that sometimes, a lot of times, there's no money. And so, to spend the money to tear off the additions that have taken place in 1910, to take it back to 1904, one, the cost to do all the woodwork and to do all the original stuff in 1904 in good wood, to the quality and level that had been there in the past, so that it can last another 100 years, is going to be really expensive. And so, right. And so all of a sudden you start hitting this wall going, well, I don't want to spend, wait a minute, we only have this much money. Right. We just can't even afford to consider going back to 1904. So we're going to have to go to 1911, and we're going to have to celebrate those things in 1911. Now, luckily, Thistle Hill had been fairly carefully maintained, except when it was a girls' boarding house,
Right.
where some things had been added and stuff. But for the most part, it was still in good shape. Now, let's take an example. If the building that's 500 years old, right? Well, how much is really left from that? 1570. How much is really there? Well, there's this tower is still there, right? Well, what is, if you take another famous building like Hampton Palace Court, there is a Jacobean Tudor dynasty there, and then there's Christopher Wren's addition in 1700s. Well, they've kept both, right? And luckily, they've got both there, but they're kind of right next to each other. And you certainly wouldn't tear down the Stuart and Jacobean stuff just to keep the Christopher Wren stuff. And so, Anyway, you can see where all this is going.
Yeah.
There's dollars that you're trying to manage. There's, what's going to be the most value, what's going to, you know,
Like historical value or significant or financial value?
both, both.
Okay.
Who are my patrons here that are going to help me pay for this? Anyway, it becomes a financial calculation at some point that you have to manage and figure out.
So I guess all that's very helpful and very fascinating because that's stuff that I'm thinking about all the time. Where I'm like, but how do you even make the decision? Like, what do you do, right? Like, how do you know what is right and what is not right? And then the other thing that like brings into question immediately is how do you know if you're 3 years removed? Like one of the things I know I've talked about on the podcast before is how when I first got here, everyone here has kind of scoffed at Victorian homes, and historic New England like owns a bunch of homes here, and they typically own first period homes or federal homes. They don't own any Victorian homes, or they own like two or three, but they own like 180 of the other. And so the question is like, well, shouldn't they get rid of one of these so they can pick up another one of these? And like,
Well, I'll
why
give
would
you
you not?
another example. We went down a couple of weeks ago to the Alamo. Okay, we know the
Yeah,
curator down there, and
cool.
she took us through there. Did you know the Alamo never had a roof on it? And it was part of the building structure that when the war and fighting started, they just hadn't gotten very far on building the roof of it. And in 1920 or early 1900s, they poured a concrete roof on top of the Alamo, right?
Shut up.
Yeah, no, I'm not shutting up. That's the truth. So if you go into the
Wow.
Alamo right now, you'll see the side walls, and then where the change comes in, they've got it pretty noticeable when the where the concrete was poured in later, and so they
Yeah.
bored into that concrete, and they're looking at it, and the rebar's rusted, and the rebar's no good, and so now what do? Okay, what are they going to restore to? Are they going to really tear off the roof of
The
that building?
entire roof.
The
Yeah.
entire roof to kind of get back to the way they think it was, and so it's just like, well, no, they're probably not, right? They're not going to, tear off the roof, and so they're highlighting it, they're showing it, but that's it's a more valuable building with the roof on it. It's going to last longer with the roof on it, and
Right.
so
And the Alamo is not in good repair right now. Like it's in as good as it can be, but they have like humidity monitors everywhere on that building.
they
I don't know if
do.
that's necessarily a sign of disrepair, but
Well,
whenever
I
you
mean,
walk in and you're looking at it, you're kind of like, "Oh shoot, is this going to fall on me right now?"
yeah, well, it's not that
That's how I
bad,
am, man.
but they
I don't
have
know.
they do have the hydrometers and the duometers and all the different,
And the tension things.
yeah, all the things going in there that bore deep into the ground to manage humidity, to manage
Yeah.
moisture, manage temperature. And so, yeah, I mean, here's the other thing. Preservation knowledge, okay, is somewhat new. Okay, realize that the Preservation Act was like 19.
1930s.
Well, I don't think it passed through Congress till 1960.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Sorry,
so,
Chandler was the first preservation carpenter in the 1930s. That's all I know.
if you look at that winter tour in DuPont, I mean, he was taking historic rooms and installing them, but he wasn't really doing it as a very good preservationist. I mean, he would kind of mix and match moldings and mix and match things. I told you the story of going to the Met in New York with Robert Adam, our instructor, and he was pointing out the floors were completely wrong for a first period house. They had been weaved together like the floors right here. And so
Yeah.
he goes, that never would have happened. The floors wouldn't have been done like that. And so preservation has even gotten better, and we're smarter now,
Yeah.
and we've got better technology and stuff like that. We never do some of the things Henry DuPont did, although he was celebrated as a preservationist for taking these rooms out. And some people say, no, he destroyed houses to take rooms out,
Right.
right? And so
That was
it's all changed.
Chandler. Joseph Chandler has the same thing. He's like kind of cited as the first preservation carpenter, and he I've talked about it before. He exaggerates a lot of the techniques that you would have seen so that they're more obvious, so that when you look back on them you can see them easier. Was his thinking. But essentially whenever Chandler's restored a home, you're like, well, this isn't right, or why were the hewing marks so big? Like, why is this lamb's tongue wrong? Like all the stuff, because it's like, yeah, it was a new science. 1930s. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty fascinating, just all the stuff that and you went over to Europe, very old buildings, and kind of how do you figure that out?
Yeah,
There's not a science to it. It's an art, and you're trying to
yeah.
make wise decisions, and you're trying to save the right things, and so
And it
anyway.
was interesting how that communicated through now. Like, obviously, I don't know the decision, like the fork in the road that they were staring down at like 1500s when there was like, major religious revolutions going on and 100 Years War. Like, I don't know what it was like. And I don't know, I guess all I know is what they decided to go with. And so you kind of get like to the victors goes the spoils, or history goes to the victors, or whatever that saying is.
Yeah.
um it's kind of a little bit of that, because there's surely elements that were said no to that we just miss now, because it's very easy to go, oh, in the 1950s this is what they did instead of this, but it's not easy to go in the 1300s they did this instead of that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we're like, I don't even know what they were doing there. We're lucky to have
Well,
this,
I mean, I think as we're just talking about this, there are so many examples of mistakes and crap that happen. I mean, if you look at the Elgin marbles, which are the famous marbles from the Parthenon in Greece,
yeah,
they're in the British Museum, and a lot of people will say that the Lord Elgin stole those marbles from the Greeks, and they won't give them back, and so the preservation, because what he would say is that they were destroying the temple and he was saving
yeah,
it. And so there's so many examples of misguided and or just kind of bad preservation stuff that goes
yeah.
on, that there's probably more examples of that than not.
Right.
One of the things we're coming up to Boston in May to do is film
Okay, yeah.
Michael Burry's that house that he's doing. One of his whole things is, and here's the other side of, there's bad preservation and whatnot, but the fact is, bad preservation is better than no preservation, because he's basically restoring this house, and we'll see it. I mean, it's an amazing. Was it 17th century, or it might be 18th
Right.
century?
He's technically restoring two houses.
Yeah, and so
With that one house.
he is. But his heartache, okay, is that everybody's just tearing these houses down. That people are
Right.
coming into these historic houses in Boston, in New England, and just tearing them down. And these are, first period, second period houses that are really important, and we're throwing them away. That's the sadder thing. That's the more frustrating thing, that no one seems to have vision to realize how valuable these things are, and why they matter. They're literally ending up in landfills, these important historical houses.
That is interesting. I think that was one takeaway that I had in France, where it was like, y'all would get rid of this? Or y'all saved this? Like, that was really interesting. And we were walking down the street one day, and we noticed there was a building that had exposed timbers on the outside, kind of like your classic medieval looking kind of building. And we were like, oh my gosh, this is like an original building. And the guy with us said, oh, they're all like this. There's just a new law that's in place that they have to cover all the timbers with plaster because of the fire risk, because of these exposed timbers being so close to other stuff. And so I started looking around the city and was like, oh, it's so obvious which houses have now been covered with plaster. But on first glance, I was like, oh, it's all stone. Why is everything stone? There's no original timber buildings. They were all around us. They just had plaster coated on them. And so
That seems to me to be a bad
fix.
example of misguided preservation.
No. I guess I'm just putting that out there as like, that's how these things happen, how they evolve. Like, it's a fire code thing.
Yeah.
Like, and I know we lose a lot of really cool and interesting pieces to stair code, fire code, fill in the blank with whatever the coating is. And I know safety is super important, but it's like, oh, how pretty was it whenever you're walking down the street seeing like inlaid timbers with plaster in between, like the, horse hairs, all that stuff, all the good stuff
No doubt.
like that. So anyway, sorry, we can be done with France now, but don't you feel like there was more content there?
Yes, good content, Jackson.
Okay, thank you. School's going well. Thanks for asking. That's all. I can give you a brief update on school if you want.
Well, just walk us through what you've been doing the last month or so. You've been
Not a lot. A lot of dovetail focus. We're doing our hanging tool cabinet. So we built a door for our hanging tool cabinet.
style and rail door with a panel.
Style and rail door with 2 panels. And so we built that. It's been weird because it's like, spring break, so everything's kind of thrown off. But we built that door probably 3 weeks ago now. And then we built it and then started working on dovetails. So dovetails has been the focus for the past little bit. And so everyone kind of like did their dovetails and then milled the parts for their cabinet because the cabinet is going to have dovetailed corners. And then after everyone milled the parts for their cabinet, they're looking at these long pieces of poplar. And we're all kind of like, well, I don't want to start my dovetail on the poplar and mess up. So everyone goes over to the bench and grabs an extra 2 practice pieces of poplar to like make sure we've got the dovetails down because, it's fine to mess up a scrap of wood like, this big. Hard to get it where the background's not trying to fade me out. But it's way worse to mess up a piece of poplar that's like 6 feet long.
Yeah.
So anyway, I redid mine and I was like, I really want to challenge myself. So I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tails. When previously I'd only done 3. And then on my actual one, I did a 5-tail dovetail with 2 half tails on either end.
And these are all with hand tools. You're not, you don't have a jig, you don't have a...
No, we have a router bit and it just goes in and, no, it's not, it's all hand tools. So hand cut, we watched a video by Klaus, what's his face?
Franz,
what's his name? Frank Klaus?
Yeah.
Frank Klaus, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
So Frank Klaus is this like beautiful cabinet maker from like Denmark or Norway or something. And he's like, Steve pointed out he pronounces drawers. So when you cut the drawer, so he like is popping out these dovetails and he works in pine. So soft wood, way easier to chop into. And he just has a super sharp chisel and he cuts his dovetails with a saw and then chisels out the rest. And so that's how every one of us in class has done it. We don't use coping saws anymore because Klaus doesn't use it. No, but we also think it's the easier you get like a straighter line on your dovetails where they actually seat with each other on the shoulder. So I don't know. I like it better using that way. But Frank Klaus in this video, he lines up like he's building drawers. So he's got 4 pieces of wood that he's got to put dovetails into. So he marks the lines on them and he's like, he doesn't mark the lines. He goes, I just eyeball it. So you cut one here and then you do another one over here and then about halfway in between the 2 and then halfway in between the 2. And then you just match them about a ½ inch apart. And he's like cutting the kerfs on these dovetails in like 3 strokes with his saw. So it's like, whoosh, 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 and then he goes to the next one. Whoosh, 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 and then he goes to the next one. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And then he sets it down and he's like, okay, so now you take your sharp chisel and you put it in the dovetail and like 4 hits of the hammer and the dovetail, like that one dovetail is like finished for that side. Then he flips it over and just goes pop, 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 and has this perfect pins, perfect dovetails. Then he puts them together and lines them up and then you glue them up. So he adds the glue and then hammers them in. And Steve goes, no dry fit necessary. Like the guy he's a master carpenter. I mean, he does these all day long. But anyway, we're all these novices looking on and we're like, oh, how is he doing them so fast? This is crazy. Anyway, so we've been loving the dovetails right now. I just got my cabinet glued up today. And so I'm ready to start finishing the milling on the inside
But I mean,
Tomorrow.
the
So,
the idea, big picture, is you are learning to use hand tools to cut joinery, to
yep.
start putting together casework, to start you're using those things because that's how a casework would have been built in 200 years ago, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
So
that's right. And also, like, it's so funny because today, we're doing like a rounded edge on the front of one of our on the like bottom lip of our cabinet, right? And so it's got this rounded profile. And Steve goes, "You got two options when it comes to the rounded profile. You can use this molding plane, or you can go out to the shaper. So your choice." And someone today asked, "Oh, Steve, is the shaper set up with the molding profile?" And Steve was like, "I think you're gonna have to set it up. I don't know." And we all know how to do it. And everyone kind of looked at each other and was like, "Steve, do you have the molding profile?" So everyone got the molding plane because it's just faster.
yeah,
Like, it's so funny that like by hand, maybe if you're doing 20 of these, it might be faster to go set it up. But by the time you spend,
right.
5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes putting it together,
20, yeah,
it's not enough to justify, because I did it in 5 minutes today,
yeah,
and I've never used a molding plane before in my life. So I was like, oh, that totally makes sense why it's better and easier and better,
yeah.
you
That's
know?
very cool. Yeah, I
So
love
there's so
that.
many things with hand tools where I don't know. I just keep thinking of like all the things that I thought were only done with a table saw, only done with whatever. Then I'm like, I'm probably just gonna pull out my rabbit plane because it'll be faster than going to a table saw and setting the gate or setting where it is at. Like if I do it with the rabbit plane, I grab my marking tool, just run it along the edge, and then I just pop my thing up against it, tighten it, get it close, rip it, and then it's like there. That's so much quicker than
Yeah, that's
going to a
great.
table saw. And some people are fast on a table saw. I don't know. Some people are better at that. And I don't know. It's kind of a to each his own thing. But even when we use the machines, we still leave a 32nd of an inch on it because we want to finish them by hands because we can just get them more accurate and it's going to be a smoother finish
Yeah,
that
I've
way.
always
It's going to
said
be
that
better.
there's precision with hand tools that you can't get with power tools. It's just because you are taking 130 seconds and 60 fourths, and you're just
Yeah. I mean, the first time Steve explained to us, like, you're going to, or he did it like this. He goes, when you mill your pieces to leave enough for you to plane off, how much should you leave extra on all of your pieces? And someone in our class goes, a 16th? And Steve was like, ha, no, no, too much, way too much. Uh, Maybe a 30-second if you want to go crazy. And so we all leave it like a 30-second, but most of us just cut to the length. And usually there's enough of an extra because your plane takes off less than 132nd. Like it just takes off so little of the material. It's way less than you think. It's just such a fine, accurate tool, especially when it's tuned in,
for those guys who aren't using hand tools and who might be inclined to start with like a low angle block plane because they're easy to use, they're friendly, they fit in your hand, but it is a skill that in my opinion is gonna sets you apart if you have the ability to have sharp chisels, sharp tools, and can use hand tools. It's a big difference.
I think if you really want to like see how cool it can be, is like using a plane. I think start with a number four. I'm much less experienced, but I think a number four feels cooler in your hand than a block plane does, and it just has a better like ergonomic. It like makes you want to keep using the tool. Number four, number five, jack plane, and then try and make two pieces of wood that are rough, so smooth that when you put them together, you can pick one up off the ground. Like that's the like first test that I think made me go, "Oh, this is so cool." And then check it for square. It like get it to where you can pick the two pieces off the ground to where both of them are so smooth, and then check to see if you're actually square. And then once you can do that, it's like, whoa, I can like really tune the crap out of this thing and make it really neat.
Yeah,
Because that's like, it's such a cool deal being able to go, like, oh, I'm more accurate than if I use a table saw because if the slightest thing changes, if it shifts, if it kicks, if it whatever, I'm more accurate with my hands. I need to leave a little bit extra because my hands are going to be better. It makes you feel like a craftsman too, rather than just like, just doing my thing. Like, trust my tools. My tool breaks, I'm useless. I don't know. I'm kind of downplaying everything else because I think hand tools are so cool. But
Yeah. No, I
that's the
love it.
school update. I think it's awesome.
I love it. I love it. All right. Cool. Good job, Jackson. Proud of you.
Thanks, man. Proud of you. Sad you couldn't join us.
Kick.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for watching this episode of the Passion for Craft podcast. We will see you on the next one.